Welcome to Holocaust Museum Houston's virtual programs, and thank you for participating in our program this evening. I'm Dr. Kelly Zuniga, CEO of Holocaust Museum Houston, and it's my great pleasure to welcome this esteemed group of panelists to our live webcast. John Guest Jr. is the Chief Executive Officer Emeritus of Houston Museum of African American Culture, and will be the moderator this evening for his panel discussion on Reminiscence on Nelson Mandela, the Civil Rights and Anti-Apartheid Movements and Human Rights. The panelists include County Commissioner Rodney Ellis, Eileen and Kase Lawal, Houston entrepreneurs and philanthropists, and Dr. Cassius Lubisi, who is the Director and General in the Presidency of South Africa and Secretary of the Cabinet in November 2010. We're fortunate to have the traveling exhibition Mandela, Struggle for Freedom on view at our museum until January 3rd, 2021. And if you live in the Houston area, we really would like to encourage you to visit our museum and view this excellent exhibition. But before we begin tonight, the panel discussion, I'd like to mention a few things. We will be leaving at a time of about 15 minutes for Q&A, and at the conclusion of the panel discussion, we will be opening up the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get through as many of those questions as possible, so we encourage you to respond through the Q&A area in the chat box. This program is also being recorded and will be available through our YouTube platform at a later date. We'll be sending this out with some information via email to all registrants within a day or two. And now it is my pleasure to hand the program over to our moderator, John Guest Jr.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm honored to have been asked by the Holocaust Museum to put together this panel as part of the Mandela Human Rights Exhibition. I was aware of the exhibit in Canada, and we all owe a great deal of gratitude to the Holocaust Museum for allowing Houston to experience it. If you've not visited it, put it on your calendar. If you're South African, it's like visiting the Apartheid Museum in Joburg and the Holocaust and Genocide Center in Cape Town simultaneously. It is a comprehensive and riveting exhibit. We're lucky to have three individuals with a lot more experience with South Africa and with Nelson Mandela, beginning with Harris County Commissioner Rodney Ellis, a former chief of staff for the late Congressman Mickey Leland, a three-term city councilman and 25-year state senator. Kase Lawal is a Nigerian-born businessman who lives and works in the United States. He is the chairman and chief executive officer of KMAC International Corporation, chairman and chief executive officer of Aaron Energy Corporation, the chairman of Allied Energy Corporation, the chairman of Unity Bank, Unity National Bank, and a frequent visitor to South Africa. Our final panelist, we're most honored to have with us all the way from South Africa, Dr. Cassius Libussi. I would be remiss, Dr. Libussi, if I did not pay homage to your incredible career that includes your September retirement as the Republic of South Africa Presidency Director-General, as Cabinet Secretary, as the head of the Forum for South African Directors General, as the point of contact for the South African Customs Union, and as the interface between South Africa and the Southern African Development Community, the African Union, BRICS, the Group of 8, the Group of 77, the United Nations, and more. Greetings, gentlemen. I'd like to start off the conversation with your memories of Nelson Mandela, the person. Commissioner Ellis, I think your first meeting with Mr. Mandela was with Governor Ann Richards, and then with Mickey Leland at the Manil Collection here in Houston, and then in South Africa with Jesse Jackson. Tell us your impressions of Mandela.
John, I think, I can't remember when time flies. I can't remember the first time I met Mr. Mandela before he was president was, in case you have to help me remember, I don't know if he went to Washington first or New York. So I was in New York, but I won't count that. When he was in Washington, everybody had Nelson Mandela fever. So I was with thousands of people trying to get close to get a photo, but didn't get there. I think Alicia, who's my wife now at the time, was Craig Washington's chief of staff. He was in Congress. But so then in New York, when he was there, shortly after he got out of prison, not too long, he made the trip to New York. You remember that case, and I went. I was lucky enough to end up being part of Reverend Jesse Jackson's entourage, which was bigger than it should have been. So I did get in the Gracie Mansion, and Lee Brown was the police commissioner. That helped, I will admit. But the first time I really got a chance to visit with him was in Houston. Mickey died in '89. So although he was a key leader on overriding President Reagan's veto of sanctions on South Africa, he died before Mr. Mandela got out of prison. But when he came to Houston to get the award at the Menil with former President Jimmy Carter, that's when I got to spend some time with him. And I'll give you my recollection. First, I'm so glad Ann Richards, we were walking, there's a picture I have on my ego wall of Ann Richards, Dominique Demonel, Nelson Mandela, and me. And Ann told the governor, said, why don't you take the picture, Rodney, and then I'll let you get on a picture. Didn't have phones or cameras then, so I did that. But what I remember was, out of all of the important people coming in, everybody wanted to see him, he's a former boxer. And so he wanted to see George Foreman, but we couldn't find him. And for some reason, Evander Holyfield was in Houston. I think it might have been Kirby John Caldwell who arranged it. Case, you were there. But so we did get Holyfield in, and that gave me a chance to spend some quality time with him. Here's my impression. He is the most popular person on the planet, icon and alive. And he was just so playful. So he would disarm you, but it was a special experience. Later on, when I had the privilege of going back and forth to South Africa a number of times, usually when there was an Mbeki Gore, Vice President of U.S., Vice President of South Africa, they had these bilateral meetings. And I lucked up and ended up representing SBC, Dr. Libussi, in their effort to become the equity partner to Telkom South Africa. And so many times when I would go with Dr. Lawal or Eileen Lawal's help, might I add, I would get to go to the events. I remember Ireland Fund Dinner, Tony O'Reilly, everybody was there sometime in the early 90s. And Mr. Mandela was walking in. He's president by then. You would have thought he had all the security. He needed a little help. He was real proud of himself and didn't want to get on that cane. So out of all of the arms that he would grab to walk into that banquet hall in Johannesburg, he grabbed my arm. Probably because I was with Johanna Makalamele and Basetsana Makalamele Kumalo now. I was with the two of them, and Tito Mbweni, I think was labor minister back then, Dr. Libussi. So he grabbed my arm to get up, to walk up the staircase, and it was so special. And I was thinking, now that's the one I wish I had the picture of. But look, clearly it was like being in the presence of God, and someone that magnificent who could be so graceful and then be a success and not hold grudges as he governed that country. In my humble opinion, he truly governed it. The most memorable meeting, by the way, was when Ed Whitaker from SBC went over. Once SBC won the tender, we had to beat the Germans to get that tender to be the equity part of a Telkom South Africa. He delivered a check for $1.2 billion. Case, a little under 1.3, 1.25, something like that, which at the time was the largest one-time investment in the history of the African continent, the largest foreign investment, and the largest American investment on one day. So that was probably the meeting that lasted the longest, but I was too busy trying to keep my client happy. But thank God that Eileen and Kase and other friends helped me spend enough time around Mr. Mandela. He didn't really know my name. He just knew I was the senator.
Yes.
And now that I'm no longer a senator, I'll point out, I'm not sure that he knew whether I was a U.S. senator or a state senator. He just knew it was that senator from Texas who was always in South Africa.
Mr. Lawal, would you add your impression of Mr. Mandela personally?
Well, thank you, Mr. Gass, and thanks to the Holocaust Museum of Houston. Thank you, Dr. Zuniga. I think Commissioner Ellis was really being very modest and, as always, full of humility. He actually was single-handedly responsible for the investment, the largest investment in Africa at that time, with his encouraging, motivating, and getting the SBC to Africa, which is now what you know as both telecom and MTN, with more than 200 million subscribers all over Africa and Middle East and in Europe. So I just want to say thank you very much, Commissioner. And as Madiba will say, where's that senator friend of yours, you know, every time. So I want to let you know that for all that I knew, Madiba thought you were a United States Senator. We know you are much more than that to us, so thank you very much. The very first time I had the opportunity and a blessing to meet Madiba was through someone that I met in 1978 while he was the ANC representative in Nigeria. I'd gone to Nigeria from Houston on holidays, and I was being introduced to the leader in Nigeria at that particular time. I was very young, and they were trying to convince me to come back home and work for the new national oil company they just set up. So I met this individual. His name is Thabo Mbeki, and he was the ANC representative in Nigeria at that time. Obviously, he became the president of the Great Republic of South Africa. So when Madiba came out, of course, we stayed in touch with him and what we were doing with the ANC representative in the United Nations, Tiboho, and the rest of the guys over there. Some of them are of late now. The chief, as we call him, we call the former president Mbeki, I call him chief. So the chief called us and said, you know, so when are you guys coming? I said, well, you know, we can't come with our passports, you know, unless an arrangement could be made for us not to be stamped, you know, at that particular time. That was about 1990, I think, when Madiba came out. So we went there, and I was introduced to him, and they put me to work, which is to talk to my friends in Africa, and because we needed money at that particular time, and see what they can do. But just meeting someone of that stature, with the aura, with everything we've read about him, with everything we've demonstrated, and with him being the leader and being incarcerated and in prison, it was incredible feeling. It was something that I just really still can't describe. Eileen and I talk about this quite often. But one thing stood out. He always makes you feel very comfortable. He talks to you as though he's known you for a very long time and doesn't look at you as a young man. He just wants to talk about, okay, so, you know, when did you come in? What are you doing now? Where are you going? And he went straight into it and said, you know, young man, we need some resources. You know, we're just coming out and we need to do something. And we understand that you know some of these leaders. Thabo here told me that he met you a long time ago as a young man, and you knew some people over there. So that's how it started. But one thing stood out of all the times that I had the opportunity to meet with Madiba was the trip that we went, and I was part of that presidential trip from Pretoria. I came in straight from Europe to join them, but we met in Tunisia, and we were going on a state visit to Libya. At that time, Libya was closed in terms of the direct air flight to go into Libya. So we had to go on a convoy with the president and all the entourage and the motorcade from Tunisia to Libya. And I'm saying this because for a man of his stature, they offered him a loan to go on the helicopter that is being provided by the then president of Tunisia. He said, no, I have to go with my delegation. And he actually rode on the road from Tunisia to Tripoli. And I don't know whether the doctor remembered that trip at that time. It was a very long time ago. And of course, we finally got there and we didn't see the brother leader, as they call Gaddafi at that time. But when it was time for the delegation to join up with the president and to meet with the delegation, the President Mandela said something that I will never forget. He said, in my delegation, people of the continent of Africa that were born here. Some of them live now and work in different parts of the world. And I just want to let you know that this is the Africa that I envisage. And they are in my delegation, and it could easily be in your delegation. That goes a long way with me. And it just tells you how modest a man and full of humility of a person of his stature and a world leader that Mandela was. So I can tell you for the next 1 week if you want to know, but I just wanted to point that out, that the man is a great man, a great leader, and one that I believe this world will continue to miss and remiss in terms of all that he stood for, the reconciliation, and making sure that people of all background, of all color, are able to live in peace together, united.
Dr. Lubisi, it's such an honor to have you take part in this discussion, thanks to Mr. Lawal. I have a few questions specifically for you. Let me give them 3 of them. First, could you tell us about the anti-apartheid movement and Mandela's and others' sacrifices to ensure its success? Second, what about the part played by the Helen Suzmans and other non-Blacks in South Africa? And finally, I'd love it, Dr. Libussi, if you could point out a couple of particular instances that illustrate Mandela's character and integrity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kase, for the opportunity, and greetings to all the other panelists that are here tonight, as well as the CEO of the Holocaust Museum Houston, Dr. Kase Lawal, and as well as Thomas Savage and Eileen Lawal. The struggle against apartheid obviously has to be seen as a continuation of the broader and long drawn-out struggles against colonialism and dispossession. The formation of the African National Congress in 1912 gave the disparate regionally based anti-colonial and anti-racist struggles a national organizational form which had not existed before that. So Nelson Mandela joined this rich tradition of struggle from his early days as at what was later known as the Fort Hare University. It was then called the Native College. He was later to be expelled, of course, from Fort Hare for his student activism, a sacrifice he was prepared to make. He subsequently formed part of the leadership of the ANC Youth League, which was formed in 1944 to up the ante against the racist government, to move from the petition-dominated methods of struggle to more active and direct challenges to the racist regime. Hence, Mandela, working with other leaders of the Youth League, adopted the Youth League's 1949 program of action, which was a radical program of action. Instead of going to England and giving petitions to the Queen, they adopted much more radical ways of meeting the enemy in the streets. In this regard, they advocated a defiance campaign against apartheid laws and dared the apartheid government to arrest them. And the defiance campaign ultimately took place in 1952. And Nelson Mandela was the volunteer-in-chief of the defiance campaign. He said, I'm the first one to be arrested. Arrest me and arrest everyone else, which is a major sacrifice for a young person at that time. Of course, together with the fellow youth leaguers, such as Oliver Tambo and Walter Sisulu and others, Mandela ascended to the ranks of the leadership of the African National Congress and gave it much more radical content than the ANC had been known for at that time. He was in fact one of the 156 leaders of the ANC and the Congress Alliance that were charged for treason in 1956. He was eventually acquitted after 5 years in 1961. Mandela, in fact, sacrificed his family during this time because it led to his divorce from his first wife. He lost his first wife because his wife just couldn't stand the fact that he was absent. And it made it very difficult even with his second wife, Winnie. He was an absent father because he was married to the struggle. His children hardly saw him at all. And it's a major sacrifice for a young couple, young couples and their children to have a father who is not there, was not able to experience their children growing, wasn't able to fully show his love to his better half. It's a sacrifice very few people would be prepared to make. Again, Mandela was thrust into radical leadership when he became the first commander-in-chief of the Revolutionary Army Umkhonto weSizwe, which was formed in 1961 after the apartheid regime had mowed down 69 unarmed African people protesting against past laws in Sharpeville in March 1960. I think many people here and across the world have failed to understand the reasons beyond why Mandela then changed tack. He was the first commander-in-chief of Umkhonto weSizwe. And I want to quote from the manifesto of Umkhonto weSizwe to indicate why Mandela led this initiative to change from peaceful protest to an armed struggle. And in this manifesto adopted in December 1961, and I wish to quote, I quote, "It is well known that the national liberation organizations have consistently followed a policy of nonviolence. They have conducted themselves peaceably at all times, regardless of government attacks and persecution. The time comes in the life of any nation when there remains only two choices: submit or fight. The time has now come to South Africa. We shall not submit, and we have no choice but to hit back by all means within our power in defense of our people, our future, and our freedom." Close quote. After his conviction, of course, in 1964 in the Rivonia trial, at which he was again accused number one, he again displayed his preparedness to make major sacrifices, this time he was prepared to pay the ultimate sacrifice with his own life. And again, here it's important, maybe for the audience, for one to cite his statement in the dock. He made a 4-hour speech in the dock after they were convicted. And he said, I quote, "During my lifetime, I've dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Close quote. There can be no greater greatness to a person who is prepared to give his own life for the liberation of his own people. Not only the liberation of black people, but also the liberation of white people, because he realized that the apartheid regime was not only imprisoning Africans, it was imprisoning white people in their own country as well. He went, of course, to spend 27 years in prison, even refusing to be released conditionally in 1985 if he renounced violence. He rejected that offer, and this rendered the apartheid regime's effort, therefore, to separate him from other imprisoned and exiled leaders of the ANC and exercise in futility. Now, you asked about the role of other racial groups. You mentioned specifically Helen Suzman. Of course, Helen Suzman launched a lone struggle inside the apartheid parliament. She was the only woman in that parliament. She was the only progressive person who consistently raised the issue of the banning of organizations, and in particular the imprisonment of Nelson Mandela and others. But we should look beyond Helen Suzman to find the role of particularly white people in the struggle against apartheid. The ANC adopted non-racialism much early on after its formation, and in fact later on allowed other race groups to form part of its leadership structures. Here we could mention people such as Helen Joseph, who led the Women's March in 1956, together with Rahima Musa, as well as the two other leaders who were at the leadership of that 20,000 march. And of course, you also had people like Joe Slovo, who was truly a non-racial person. There are lots of other white people in the Congress of Democrats who were part of the Congress Alliance, who threw their weight behind the struggle for freedom in South Africa. So the non-racial character of the struggle for freedom is one of the key characteristics for which Nelson Mandela lived for, and hence that statement in the doc.
We know there have been 5 Black Nobel Peace Prize winners: Albert Luthuli, Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela of South Africa, and Martin Luther King and Barack Obama of the United States, with the first 4 celebrated for work to fight apartheid and segregation in their countries. That there are 3 of the 5, it speaks to the unwavering belief in human rights ingrained in South Africans, as you really talked about in the ANC. But as Mandela pointed out, the circumstances were different. In the United States, there was a democracy with constitutional guarantees of equal rights that protected nonviolent protest, though there was still prejudice against Blacks. South Africa was a police state with a constitution that enshrined inequality and an army that responded to nonviolence with force. In the United States, Blacks were a minority, while Blacks in South Africa were an oppressed majority. Yet the civil rights and anti-apartheid movements were never far from each other in conversation or imagination across continents. Why is that? I'd like to ask each of you, Dr. Lawal, Commissioner Ellis, Dr. Libussi, what's that connection? Why was that attraction so strong?
You muted Dr. Lawal. Yeah, he's gonna unmute himself. I'll jump in while he's trying to find his button. Look, you think back of even the struggle that Dr. King, Martin Luther King led is interesting. Even before Nelson Mandela and the ANC, Chief Lutuli and Dr. King had some correspondence with them. This is long before, it was as easy as it is now to communicate. But I think the parallels were quite similar in many ways. And also the fact that our government propped up the South African apartheid regime for so long. Our government probably played a role in the capture of Nelson Mandela leading up to the Rivonia trial. I got to know George Bezos fairly well, Doctor, and I read in the New York Times that he passed away not long ago, who was white and Mr. Mandela's lawyer. But our government in the United States was pretty much on the wrong side of most liberation movements throughout Africa. So there were tremendous parallels. And here's what's interesting. I think if you were to take on the whole, Black people on the planet who probably have the highest standard of living on the planet, it'd be Black people in the United States. I think as a whole, if you were to measure Black people who have the second highest standard of living on the globe, it would be case South Africa or Nigeria. And if you were to measure where you have the deepest divides between those who have and those who don't, rich and the poor, it would be America and South Africa. So there are tremendous parallels in those struggles. And, just think how long apartheid lasted over here. Think about being in Houston and George Floyd, maybe it's still here. And how long it lasted in South Africa. So there are tremendous parallels, and that's why I think there's such symmetry between our struggles.
Mr. Lawal.
Well, yeah, people have asked over a period of time, what do these great leaders have in common? And I believe that they share so many things in common. Besides their ideals, while Martin Luther King Jr. fought the evils of racism and segregation right here in the United States, Nelson Mandela dedicated his life to fighting South Africa's apartheid, racism, and segregation, which was called apartheid. And when you really study both men, you will see these clear similarities. Now, while they never really met each other, they shared a whole lot in common. And these were the ideals that I believe Dr. Lubisi mentioned in terms of ultimate sacrifice, somebody willing and saying that about 60 years ago while in the dock, giving a speech for 4 hours. And you look at the peaceful demonstrations and peaceful struggle that Martin Luther King Jr. embodied. You could then see in their various speeches that has been quoted and written over and over again, the similarity in these two great men that never met each other. They communicated, as I read, through intermediaries, through their respective struggles and the leadership that they were giving that struggle. But having this event this evening could not have come at a better time. We're at a crossroads ourselves. We're at a crossroads seeking equality and being valuable as a people. and all the men and women that you've mentioned that are non-Black, that have supported the struggle. They are the shoulders that all of us are actually working on and resting on right now. And I believe that the two men should continue to be an inspiration to our generation and the generations to come. And we should never, ever forget the sacrifices that they made to make sure that we'll have the life that we have today. So to the extent that we're at the crossroads, to the extent that in about 13 days, we are going to the polls to exhibit the freedom to vote, I hope people will not take it for granted. It is because of these leaders, these two men, among others, that have sacrificed for us to be able to make decisions about how we are going to be led and how we're going to lead. I feel very privileged to have known one, never met the other, but it was the inspiration that Martin Luther King Jr. gave that made me to come to America 48 years ago and went straight to Georgia because it was the bedrock of civil rights. And I'm very glad I did that in spite of having to convince my parents to come to America. Thank you.
Dr. Lubisi.
Thank you very much, because I don't want to repeat what Commissioner Ellis and Dr. Lawal have said. I endorse exactly what they have said, but I just want to indicate, for instance, the African National Congress was itself formed by intellectuals who had actually studied in the United States of America. The very name African National Congress is taken from the United States. When Dr. Pixliga Isaac Aseme suggested this name comes from Congress, as in Congress in the United States. The ANC was formed as the Parliament of the People of South Africa, just as Congress is the Parliament of the people of the United States. So there are lessons, so there have always been parallels, right? Even before Mandela got involved in struggle. So when he joined the struggle, he necessarily was always aware of the civil rights movement in the United States. Regrettably, of course, as Dr. Lawal indicated, he did not interact much with the civil rights movement because he was in prison. But he kept abreast of the developments in the United States because, as you correctly say, the issues were very similar despite our positions as a minority and as a majority. All of them oppressed nonetheless. We're facing racism, all of us. We're facing deliberate underdevelopment. We're facing discrimination and all sorts of human attacks from the respective governments. Mandela actually recognized, when he visited the United States for the first time in 1990, he actually acknowledged the role played by the civil rights movement in the United States, to the extent when he gave the speech at the joint sitting of Congress in 1990, he made a specific reference to such leaders as W.E.B. Du Bois, John Brown, Martin Luther King Jr., and others. He went to the extent of going to the tomb of Martin Luther King to pay tribute because he had not gotten a chance to meet him. He went, he met his widow, Coretta Scott King, and his Martin Luther and Coretta Scott King's children, who were at the center. And he acknowledged others. He worked subsequently after he was released from prison with leaders of the civil rights movement, such as Andrew Young and the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Of course, the commissioner indicated, and Dr. Lawal, that they were forming part of those delegations of the Reverend Jesse Jackson to meet President Mandela. So this connection was there, and even during the struggle for liberation, when the ANC set up office in the United States, it was largely assisted by the leadership of the American civil rights movement.
Finally, the central theme. Finally, the central theme of the exhibition is human rights. No country clearly framed its struggle as one of human rights more than South Africa. As president of the ANC, Lutuli continually framed apartheid as a crime against humanity and aligned the anti-apartheid struggle with emerging international human rights norms. Still, Dr. Libussi, when Mandela was released from prison in 1990, having embraced the need for the spirit of a nation, could anyone have imagined his commitment to human rights during the national reconciliation in South Africa? I think a lot of people were surprised. Your comments?
Yes, some people were surprised because they hadn't quite understood the history of the ANC and Mandela himself. We should recall that Mandela was not an isolated individual. He was part and parcel of the leadership of the African National Congress. And he was steeped in the ANC's human rights tradition from very early on. He knew where to go to. He knew the ultimate destination of struggle. But along the way, when you struggle, you always use certain tactics to fit the times in which you fight the fight you are fighting. The ANC adopted a Bill of Rights in the Africans' Claims document in December 1943, which was a response to the Atlantic Charter signed by the Allied forces, led by Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill in 1941. Now, the ANC's Bill of Rights actually predated the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted in 1948 by a full 5 years. So the ANC adopted the Bill of Rights before the United Nations adopted one. So Mandela comes in steeped in that tradition. So, and he put this firmly on the agenda of his presidency. In his inauguration speech, for instance, in '94, he says, "Let there be justice for all. Let there be peace for all. Let there be work, bread, water, and salt for all. Let each know that for each the body, the mind, and the soul have been freed to fulfill themselves." And Madiba went on to sign our constitution of the new Republic of South Africa on the 10th of December, which is International Human Rights Day. It is a significant a symbol for him to have done that. And the Constitution of South Africa contains a justiciable Bill of Rights, which has all manner of human rights, which I can't mention for purposes of time. But that is the tradition of human rights in which Madiba was steeped in.
Any final words from each of you before we open up to questions from the audience?
I just want to thank Dr. Libussi in particular. We started, it was 1:30 in the morning over there, so it's so special to have you here. Look, that the process of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was just amazing to go through that process. I had the privilege of going to one where Bishop Tutu cried when people talked about the atrocities that they committed, and it was just such a cleansing process for people. And you know, it is amazing that the architect of one of the great architects of your Constitution, Cyril Ramaphosa, is now your president. But Mr. Mandela was also a team player, because I don't think that Deputy President Mbeki was necessarily his first choice, but it was the ANC's choice, and he embraced it. And you just got an amazing country. I want to encourage all your listeners tonight, take that trip to South Africa. It takes a little longer to get there, but out of all the places on the planet, it is clearly Cape Town in particular, and Pretoria, of course, Tshwane, are clearly some of the most beautiful places on the planet.
Dr.
I turn
Libussi,
this back over to Kelly.
yes, I have a question for Dr. Libussi. Can you describe your relationship with Nelson Mandela?
My relationship with Nelson Mandela was that of a father and son. It was that of a leader and follower. I was, before when Mandela was in prison, I was actually a member of the National Executive Committee of the Release Mandela campaign. And I took it upon myself, together with others in the liberation movement, to keep the name of Nelson Mandela alive, to ensure that he is not forgotten, as well as the rest of the leadership that is on Robben Island. So when he came out, we took keen interest in getting close to him and just being there to experience the aura of the man. He was an absolutely amazing personality. As Commissioner Ellis said, President Mandela was very naughty sometimes. He had an absolutely great sense of humor, and he would catch you by surprise with this sense of humor sometimes. But he was also a stern father figure, very stern. He knew when people should not cross the line, and he would tell us off in no uncertain terms. We had a big debate because at that time I was young, and we were in the South African Youth Congress, and we opposed the suspension of armed action, which President Mandela was pushing at that time. And he and Walter Sisulu, at one meeting which took place at the University of Durban, Westville, he gave us a huge clap. He really went for us, because he, together with Walter Sisulu, said we were suggesting that they are not radical. Then they started reading us their history of radicalism. And we looked very small. We left with our tails between our legs. Very, very difficult. So he could be a very stern person and very frank. Of course, when he was ill and close to the time when he was about to depart, we connected once again with him, because I was the main organizer of his funeral, and we were organizing this funeral with him. So I used to meet him very often at his home in Houghton to plan for the funeral. People didn't know that we were actually planning the funeral. We planned it for 8 years. With him participating, he told us what he wanted for the funeral and everything. Of course, it took time for members of his family to understand this. Some even resisted. And when they see us, they thought, oh, here these guys again, coming to discuss a funeral. But he was that brave a person to be able to see that the days of his life are nearing, end of his life are nearing. And he said, no, let's not be confused. But when I'm gone, I want to be very clear what needs to happen when I'm gone. And we pursued his wishes to the letter.
In fact, if I may add, Dr. Lubisi is being extremely modest. Being the cabinet secretary for the last 10 years in the Republic of South Africa, for the two presidents, President Zuma, President Ramaphosa, until about a month ago when he retired. He actually planned that funeral, and I believe you had about 50 head of states that
101.
came in.
I mean, 101.
Oh, okay.
101, yes.
So that tells you how much and how involved and how much a tutor and tutelage that Dr.
In case, as you know, the actual funeral was in Kuno. And was that like a big tent? I was there, a big tent that you put in, and Kuno's difficult to get to, the town where Madiba was raised as a child. And I remember everybody wanted to, heads of state had planes. Popo Malefi used to be the governor of the Western Cape. He started some airline. So I was honored to get an invite, but then I had to get there. It's really Jerry Dunphy and Nadine Hack. So we got on that plane. I think it was a cargo plane to get there with Idris Elbow, by the way. But what a splendid homegoing ceremony it was for Madiba.
I have another question regarding truth and reconciliation, and this is really for each of you. What was your experience during that period of time, and your impressions associated with how Mandela started that process and his background associated with starting it?
Yes, Madiba, of course, had the view that we cannot be trapped by our history of conflict. We had a choice. We could adopt the post-Nazi approach in Germany, where we would prosecute all the Nazis. We could have done the same in South Africa, but that would have trapped us in our past. We wanted to break with the past and bring true reconciliation to South Africa, but it was not unconditional reconciliation. It had to be accompanied by people telling the truth about their role in the past. That would make us to have a clean break. And Madiba was advised by very fine members of the ANC and its allied organizations, people such as Zola Skweyiya, Kada Asmal, Arthur Chaskalson, George Bezos, and others who played a big role in conceptualizing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we had learned such things as well from other countries such as Chile and other countries who had gone through the same exercise. So it was for us a brave and brave leadership by Madiba to take us through that route when in fact there were many who were paying for the blood of the oppressors. It was brave leadership on his part.
I thought it was a remarkable process, because the concept, Kelly, was if you confess your atrocities, then you would be given immunity from prosecution. If you didn't, you could be prosecuted. And the apartheid regime kept excellent records. And sort of like somewhere around here in this country, there are records.
Right.
Whoever owned my ancestors somewhere, if I could get them, places like Brown University went through that process. But it was a remarkable process. Initially, intellectually, it was challenging for me coming from the West, until I went to that meeting in some little town, Cassius, where Bishop Tutu cried. And the atrocities in the rural areas in some ways were much worse. We drove somewhere like an hour and a half from Cape Town, wherever we were, in the middle of nowhere, because they didn't get the attention you get in Joburg and other places in Durban. But it was really to see in this little town, people talk about how they tied people up, beat them, castrated them. And then to see the former warders cry when they go through what they did. And the family members of people who were victims crying was quite cathartic. I mean, by the one I was at, by the time it was over, I think everybody in the room was crying, including the press.
Mr. Lawal, did you ever experience a reconciliation moment?
Well, I think Dr. Libussi said it all. It was right in the center of it. I just thought that was something that was unique in the world. Most people did not know how Blacks were going to react if they became the leaders of the country. They were very afraid. And I think the concept of truth and reconciliation that the ANC embraced and allowed Madiba to implement was perhaps the best thing that happened to South Africa. And I believe it's something that United States at this particular time can actually look upon, and perhaps we can learn something from it. So I believe that that was a great leadership on the part of Madiba. And I believe very strongly that we can learn a lot from that, and especially at the crossroads where we are right now in terms of equality and opportunity for all.
I have one more question, and this is actually to all of you as well, is what do you say to those who feel that they've been fighting the same fight for so many years? How do you stay encouraged after so long?
Yeah, it is. I guess you never humanly tire from wanting to free yourself. Because if you tire, you will not be free. So you have to consistently keep on the fight. You are motivated by the oppression, by the repression, by the murder, by the torture. So that keeps us going. And you are motivated by the leadership such as Nelson Mandela, who spent years in prison and yet continue to hold and believe in what they believed in, and continue to leave us despite the major sacrifices that they would have made. There are those who paid the ultimate sacrifice, who were killed by the apartheid regime in our neighboring countries through deliberate bombings. There are those who were maimed inside and outside the country, those who were killed inside the country. And the presence of apartheid was right in our eyes, where you see people being killed on a daily basis, where you see the suffering of the people. That ethically speaks to you and say, you can't give up the fight until you win. And that was what kept us going for all those years.
Commissioner Ellis?
I think Madiba's book probably says it all. It's a long walk to freedom. But it's a journey worth taking. And look, I would say to your listeners, what a special moment on our planet right now. You know, all around the world, whatever got our attention, maybe it's a pandemic, maybe it's because we all focus on the news, but this focus on equity. George Floyd's case was the latest one that triggered it all around the world. I mean, people in Brazil, some of whom didn't know they were Black, be the color of this shirt. And I say, oh, you Afro, Brazil, oh no, Portuguese. You know, in our world, we've done something with this race thing. No matter where you are on the planet, the darker you are, the blacker you are, the more, in my judgment, you tend to be stepped on by the system. But I think there's a period of international reconciliation going on now. And the challenge is for those young people who may be disheartened, it's a long walk to freedom. What can you do to make things better?
Mr. Lamar?
Kelly, I think both distinguished gentlemen, Cassius and Rodney, says it all. And I'd just like to recall in 1993, Nelson Mandela was awarded the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize, for his effort in terms of abolishing apartheid in South Africa. And on May 10, 1994, he was inaugurated as the first Black president of the Republic of South Africa. And throughout the presidency, Madiba tried to bring about a change from apartheid and minority rule to one of a Black majority in South Africa. In 1996, he signed a new constitution. And I quote, he said, "For us to be free, it's not merely to cast off one's chain, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. We can never, ever be tired of the struggle until everyone is free, equal, and valuable." Thank you, Kelly.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for all of your really, really interesting and I should say motivating conversation tonight. And especially a big thank you to John Gass for pulling together our panelists this evening. So thank you all for joining us with our series, and we hope you'll join us for our next video chat, and have a wonderful evening and good night.